Dancing Earth evolved. I'd always been, well, I started out my dance career in New York as a ballet dancer and then a modern dancer. And the powwow dance was something I did separately in the summertime. So I'd escape New York and go hit the powwow trail. And the worlds at that time were very separate, very, there wasn't a lot of crossover. There wasn't desire or interest in crossover. And there wasn't an authenticity or integrity in any attempts that I'd seen in crossover.
When you're saying crossover, you're talking about the different tribes?
I'd say more like there's a lot of interest in preserving traditional dance, with powwow falling in the general area of traditional. That was how it was considered, and then putting that on stage. That started to shift in the 80s with American Indian Dance Theater, which started putting powwow dance on stage.
You want to end on 2 feet, though, and then you get to, yeah.
But I had not yet seen. I wanted to participate in someone else's productions as, you know, as a dancer. And as a woman in this century, I ended up creating it myself. And there were other people that were starting to do that in Canada and other places, but I didn't know about them. I couldn't find them. There wasn't internet and all that. When I moved to New Mexico, actually, I was so impacted by the landscape. I wanted to come here because I knew about the visual arts scene, with native contemporary visual arts being quite well respected here. And I thought I'd be creating like a kinetic parallel to that. So, but it was also that sense of landscape, probably understanding stillness and subtle movements, which is essentially like that subtle movement of desert and mountain that started to impact me, where it was less about an idea that I have that I will impose onto dancers and more about what movements are evolving out of our response to environment, for example. Very important to express an intertribal viewpoint in that case, because then Dancing Earth becomes a metaphor for Indigenous leadership. So not the idea of a hierarchy with one person's vision being superimposed onto everyone else, whether that's a vision for a narrative or for an Indigenous perspective of one tribal nation, but more like a circle of leadership where everyone comes in valued and respected as collaborators and bringing in what they contribute as artists as well as what they contribute from a cultural perspective, or even a distance from cultural perspective, making space for that as well. There's a huge amount of disparity between continuous traditional cultures and where we are now.
So don't worry about being precise.
It's a vision that is unique in the United States. I have assembled wonderful collaborators, intertribal, in the area of dance, music, visual art, videography, photography, costume design, every aspect of production, and putting Indigenous worldview into movement-based theater practice as well as teaching practices, so movement workshops, that kind of thing. So that's sort of what we do, who we are.
What is your tribal heritage, and how has it worked intertwining all of these different tribal heritages? What has the reception been like?
It's interesting because I refer to the terminology Métis, which is recognized in Canada, and that also means a person of mixed heritage. So I found that this exploration into the idea of diversity contained in one person is also paralleled by what's happening in the company, in that it's not it's not, like I said, not one perspective, but bringing together different voices. And the challenge for me is creating a structure that I call it a map, actually. It's like I come in with, in choreography particularly, with a set of landmarks that that maybe have come to me through dreaming or oftentimes through cultural sharing from elders. So I map it together. Maybe, like, for instance, there's a Yoemi story that's about this transformation that happens in water, and I'm putting that in the context of an Anishinaabe story about walking at the edge of the Great Lakes, and putting these different things in as touch points. and then people might be coming in with their own tribal experiences. So for me, as the director and choreographer, it's, and sometimes it's coming out through the bodies. There's information that's coming out through the bodies. People might not be coming with stories or language necessarily. Maybe that's what I've been collecting in the bowl to get there. And then finding the way to weave it together. It's an organic way of working. It's more the unison that's trees in the wind or grasses in the wind. Like you can see the wind moving through the trees, and you can see how each one reflects a little differently, but you know what's happening, that the wind is going in this direction. So that idea of unison with individual response.
So how do dancers and students come to you?
Oh, that's always a lovely, serendipity. Some of the dancers in my company I met here in Santa Fe when I first moved here, when I was teaching at different reservations and different schools, and they were 8 or 10 years old. And now they've gone off to college or gone off to professional dance careers, and I might be luring them back for some time. And then other dancers, it's sort of mystical how it evolves. Like they hear about me and they, find their way to Santa Fe to come and audition. Or I hear about them, like, oh, there's this break dancer who's he's the checkout boy at Whole Foods. And I go with instinct. I can kind of tell. And then I also test things out because I want to be inclusive and cultivate, but it's also not a life for everyone. It's like I'm looking for warriors, for revolutionaries, for people who are willing to sacrifice and to really make a commitment to transformation and change for the positive. That's what has been shared with me from elders about the reason for our arts and our culture.
When did you know that because obviously you're mentoring a lot of people. Yeah. When did you know that was what you wanted to do?
It's hard to say which came first. If the teaching came first or the ideas for choreography, they really impacted each other. So at a certain point it was really when I came to New Mexico. Some of my first jobs were being sent by other organizations out to reservation areas and in the public schools where at that time there were more Native American children, even in the Santa Fe school system. So teaching, but then wanting to bring a more culturally based dance form to those children, and or wanting them to, so I had this vision, and we're talking with like 8 years old or 5th graders, and then I also wanted to be able to show them what to aspire to. In terms of training, how do we get there? There's a lot that I've come to discover through connecting sound and movement, sound in the service of language. So allowing indigenous languages to help inform the creative process. Every language, for example, has a word for sky or for water. And if you break down the sounds, the vocal quality, there's certain sounds that make you feel or move a certain way. Like an E sound is different from an Ah sound. And sort of accessing what that is in your body and finding a way to express that. That's often a touch point to start with. And it also allows for all the dancers to come in a sort of equal basis. So a lot of dancers who might have a lot of Western training, ballet and modern, might not be as comfortable with vocalization. And so it sort of evens the playing ground, so everyone's coming in order to move more instinctively. Because the dancers that I gather come from a variety of backgrounds. Could be martial arts, break dance, powwow dance, ballet, modern. Definitely it's like a big melting pot. I think we're at a crossroads. There's a tremendous opportunity for people to sort of accept sovereignty or take on sovereignty and self-definition versus relying on or being really put down and this idea of sort of the steps of genocide. breeding out, as it were. But with Dancing Earth, I've been very inclusive. I brought in people who maybe felt distanced. They felt, pushed aside because of adoption or relocation or separation from language, and sort of brought in this possibility, this sense of possibility. Maybe it means that they'll go home and they'll start asking questions. Maybe it means that they meet someone in the company who becomes, they find out it's from the same nation and helps them sort of fill in the gaps. Maybe it means they hear a story and it reminds them of one that they'd forgotten, or that through our physical explorations they're starting to access this part of themselves so they can stand their ground as Indigenous people with pride and know that they're part of the circle and that they're important. And that's something that Dancing Earth is really giving to this